Hey listeners, welcome back to The Abyss. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Hallie.
And we're so excited for you to join us for our second episode.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening in again. We would love for you to go ahead and subscribe if you like our podcast. If you do, you'll go ahead and get us popping up on your feed every time a new episode comes out. And we'd love to have you listening.
Today we're going to be talking about a pretty weird case, pretty scary case, and that is the case of the Cowden family. They just went on a little camping trip for Labor Day weekend and were never seen again alive.
So let's jump into it.
All right. So the Cowden family was pretty much just your average family. There was Richard, who was 28, his wife Belinda, who was 22, and their two kids, David, who was 5, and Melissa, who was 5 months old. And Richard was a log truck driver. They lived in White City, Oregon. You know, just your average family getting by. Come Labor Day weekend, Richard was actually going to spend that whole weekend putting gravel down on their driveway. So he was going to do the whole job. He was going to go get the load, bring it back, do the whole thing. But his car actually ended up breaking down, so he couldn't actually go get the load. He decided, you know, why waste the weekend? It was a holiday. So he packed his family up in their old truck and decided to go camping that weekend.
The Cowden family ended up going camping with their family dog Droopy in the Siskiyou Mountains. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it was near Carberry Creek in Copper, Oregon. This was on August 30th when they decided to go on this camping trip, and they stayed until September 1st, 1974.
Around 9 a.m. on September 1st, the last day of their trip, Richard and his son decided to head over to the little general store, and they picked up some milk, went back to their campsite, and decided to go for a swim.
Yeah, and when they were at that general store, that was the last sighting of anyone from the Cowden family. Belinda's mother, Ruth Grayson, lived really close to the campsite, and so the Cowden family was going to go by and visit her for dinner before they headed all the way back home.
But they never actually made it there, and, you know, mothers worry, so she decided she would just get in her car, go to their campsite. You know, this was in the 70s, no cell phones, so she just decided to go check on them, make sure everything was okay, and she stumbled upon a pretty eerie sight at the campground.
Yeah, it was horrifying. When she got there, their truck was still there with the keys on the picnic table, but Belinda's purse was also there with her cigarettes that she smoked. There was a diaper bag that was set up and a camp stove that was set up with a half-finished carton of milk.
The milk was just sitting there on the table, just like somebody had planned on coming back pretty soon.
And the only thing that was missing were their bathing suits. Richard's wristwatch and his wallet was even on the ground, which from some of the readings I heard, it wasn't one of the cheapest wristwatches you would buy. Like, he had a very nice one, and for it to just be laying on the ground, someone could have easily stolen it.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have just been throwing it around either.
Initially, when she got there, she thought maybe they're taking a hike or something like that. So she waited for a little bit to see if they would come back to the campsite. And when they never did, she started to get pretty concerned. So she contacted the authorities to let them know that something had happened to the Cowden family. The officials took it very seriously and came straight down and searched the area until it was dark out.
And the next day, on September 2nd, the family dog Droopy actually was found scratching at the door of that same general store where Richard and his son had been the previous day. So after Droopy was found, that pretty much solidified that something really had gone wrong. So they decided to really double down on the searching, and they brought out the state police, local police, scouts, the United States Forest Service, the National Guard, hundreds of volunteers. It was one of the biggest searches in Oregon State history.
They searched 25 miles of road and trail that surrounded the campsite. They even had helicopters fly over the area looking with infrared lights. They found nothing, came up empty-handed. The search ended on September 7th, but the family and friends continued to search afterwards. They weren't just going to stop after 5 days thinking that the family wasn't somewhere in the area. They had to be there, and the family just had to make sure that they were safe.
Yeah, so because the bathing suits had been the only thing missing, the first kind of assumption was that maybe they just went swimming and there was a drowning incident. And so they searched really well in the water, found absolutely nothing, no bodies, nothing like that. So they pretty much rolled that out as a theory.
Yeah, and other than that, it seems like this family just kind of vanished right into thin air.
The family wouldn't actually get any answers to where their loved ones were until 7 months later.
Yeah, April 12th, 1975 to be exact. 2 gold prospectors were hiking when they found the decomposing body of a male that was tied to a tree about 7 miles from the Cowden's campsite. And this man had been severely decomposing, and the animals around in the area had even started to scavenge his body, and bones were just scattered everywhere.
Yeah, so that's a pretty horrifying thing to stumble on.
In addition, there was a small cave nearby that had 3 more bodies inside of it. One was an adult female, a small child, and a baby, which correlates exactly with the Cowden family. This was confirmed by their dental records to be the Cowden family. This small cave also was described, every time I read it, was like wedged or shoved in was the family. So it had to be a pretty small cave for this adult woman and 2 children to have to be wedged or shoved into it. And I think it's pretty clear that there was some foul play, because in front of the cave, it was piled up with rocks. Like someone tried to hide it. Someone tried to hide their bodies.
And this finding was actually pretty weird for reasons we'll get into in just a minute. It was determined that Belinda and her son David, who was just 5 years old, were killed from .22 caliber gunshot wounds.
And Melissa, the 5-month-old, had severe head trauma.
So Richard was too decomposed for them to actually figure out a cause of death.
Investigators believed that Richard was killed in the place he was found, tied to that tree. But as for the rest of the family, they weren't quite sure if they were killed at the cave or if maybe they were killed elsewhere and transported to the cave. There was no weapon found at the scene or anywhere where the Cowden families were, the campsite. Nowhere, no gun found.
Yeah, and that was significant because their initial theory was maybe it was a murder-suicide situation where he killed his family and then killed himself. Why would he tie himself to a tree, though? But people do weird things. But they didn't find a weapon, and it's hard to hide a weapon once you're dead.
Authorities believe that Richard and David went to the Copper General Store, and when they got back, they ended up going swimming in Carberry Creek because that would explain the missing bathing suits, and then maybe they were abducted at gunpoint.
The scene itself where they found the family, to me, seems pretty sadistic. Like, you think about, he probably had to, whoever did this probably had to restrain Richard to do whatever he was going to do to the rest of the family. So you can imagine how horrifying that is to be tied up and knowing that your family's being hurt in some way, whether it was right in front of him or it happened somewhere else, but just one of the worst situations.
Not to mention that it involved a 5-month-old and a 5-year-old. That's hard to consider and grasp.
Just to have no regard for just an innocent little baby and just a little kid who was just starting life.
After the authorities had found the bodies of the Cowden family, they decided to start interviewing people that were in that area on September 1st, on Labor Day. And one family from Los Angeles, California, had arrived at the campground at 5 p.m. on September 1st. They were walking around the trails, exploring a little bit, when they saw 2 men and a woman parked in a truck, a pickup truck, nearby. The father said, quote, "They acted like they were waiting for us to leave, and frankly, they made us nervous, so we moved on." I think that is a huge deal for someone to make you so nervous that you feel like you have to leave a campsite. You can't even stay there.
Yeah, and it just really shows how much you have to trust your gut, because you never know when it's telling you that you're near a killer.
Yeah, exactly. Also, a resident from Grants Pass came forward who had volunteered with the search party in September for the Cowden family, had told authorities that he searched that cave in September and there were no bodies there. He confirmed this by taking the police to that location. It was the same place that the Cowden family was found.
So that's a pretty weird fact. That would mean that someone would have had to come back and hide those bodies. There could have been any span of time in those 7 months that happened, but it was never officially substantiated, but just a really weird fact of the case that presented by somebody.
Yeah, and if it is true, then that means that the 3 of them at least had to have been taken elsewhere and brought back. A lieutenant on the case, Lieutenant Keyser, suspected that it was a local who knew the area because of the fact that, this small cave out at this campground, it's not everyone's going to know about it.
So that brings us to a man named Dwayne Lee Little. He lived in the area and he was 25 years old at the time of this crime, but back when he was 15, he murdered and then raped a 16-year-old girl named Orla Phipps.
Yeah, she had multiple stab wounds and head trauma, so it was not, a gunshot, like, quick. It seemed like something that was
very personal, very close.
Definitely a passionate kill.
He was sentenced to life in prison for that crime, but only ended up serving about 8 years of that sentence before being put out on parole.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah.
When he was put out on parole from the Oregon State Penitentiary, it was May 24th in 1974, the same year that this Cowden family incidents happened.
Police determined that Little was in the area at the same time as this crime.
Yeah. So not only was he on parole, but he was in Copper on Labor Day.
And that wasn't the only connection.
Little's parents also owned a pickup truck that matched the description provided by the family that witnessed those people making them nervous on Labor Day. And that would also match the statement that it was 2 men and a woman. So what if it was Little and his mother and father?
Of course, his parents denied any knowledge of this, but a lot of parents would do that.
Yeah, some people do anything to protect their kid.
It was proven that they were in the area at the time, though, by a miner who owned a cabin nearby, and he had one of those little guest books that you sign your name in when you visit, and wouldn't you know it, who signed their name in that same day?
Who?
It was Dwayne Lee Little and his family.
Oh, wow. I could have never guessed. Oh, man. When Little was confronted about this, he did admit that he had driven the truck from Crescent City, California to Rooch, where his parents lived, but he didn't mention anything about Copper. Ironically, though, going through Copper would have been his quickest route. When I drive, I know I take the fastest route.
Yeah, you'd think he wouldn't go completely out of his way. Investigators searched Little's home and his truck and found that they were suspiciously clean, like spotless clean.
And Lieutenant Keyser said, quote, "Our lab people went over this thing with a fine-toothed comb. They said it had been meticulously cleaned. Most pickups have signs of occupancy, but not this baby. It had been cleaned."
And I don't know about you, but my car sure is not meticulous.
No. Definitely some signs of occupancy in mine.
To make things more suspicious, Little's girlfriend told police she saw him with a .22 caliber gun 2 times, once at Christmas the same year as this crime and once the January after that.
Yeah, and the only thing about this statement that she came forward with was that she had also found out that Little was cheating on her around Christmas time. Could she have been reporting this as a way to get revenge on him?
Could really go either way. It could be like, I'm not going to cover up your bull anymore and I'm just going to tell him everything. Or it could just be, I know that you're being looked at for this, so I'm going to throw a wrench in things and, make you look really bad. It's hard to say which way it goes there.
Yeah, not to mention that they never found a gun. They never found this gun that she was talking about. Even though they couldn't find the weapon, they decided to give Little an ultimatum. They told him that they would either revoke his parole or he could take a lie detector test on the Cowden family disappearances. And surprisingly, Little decided to refuse the lie detector test and just go straight back to prison.
Which, even though, lie detector tests obviously have their problems, that's still a pretty crazy thing to do, in my opinion, just to say, nope, not even going to talk about it and just send me back to prison.
If I had been to prison before, I would not be wanting to take the blame for a murder that I didn't commit.
At least there he would have a chance, but without it, he just straight back to prison.
However, Little was paroled again on April 26th, 1977.
Which turned out to be a huge mistake.
Yeah. 3 years later, on June 2nd, he picked up a pregnant 23-year-old woman named Margie Hunter, whose car broke down near Portland, Oregon, and he ended up sexually assaulting and beating her. He stabbed her in the, bottom of his
base of the neck? Yeah.
In the base of her neck.
But Margie Hunter was a badass, and she was not going down without a fight.
No.
So what happened with that was she had some car trouble on the side of the road, and a blue Civic pulled up, and the man inside asked her, do you need some help? Do you need a ride? She said, no, I don't need a ride home, but maybe if you could just take me to the nearest payphone, because remember, no cell phones, nothing like that.
I mean, it's the 80s.
Yeah. She goes to the phone, calls friends until she runs out of change. Nobody answers. She heads to the gas station nearby, calls some more friends. Nobody answers. And she decides, okay, I'm just going to walk back to my car. Hope I can find some help that way. But on her way back, this blue Civic pulls up again. She had actually recognized this man as someone she had worked with. So, you know, it wasn't really a stranger danger situation. Even if you've only seen someone a few times, that's still sort of some relief when you're in a situation like that, you know, just to see someone that you know, a familiar face. And so she was like... It's
even a sense of security in a way.
Yeah. So she was like, sure, if you could take me home, that'd be great. He says, yep, sure, you know, hop in. And she does. But on the way home, she's giving him directions. She gives him directions to turn at a certain place, and he just keeps going. And I can imagine how your heart would just drop in that situation.
Straight to your stomach.
Yeah, she must have known at that point something was seriously wrong. So she decided to tell this man that she was pregnant. She thought maybe he would let her go. Maybe he would be soft to that fact. It didn't work, unfortunately. He pulled a switchblade on her. He beat her. He, like we said, she was stabbed in the base of the skull. She had lacerations on her arms, on her wrists, and hands. Like, she took a beating, but she was not going to give up. She had her baby. She was like, this is not going to be the end of me. And she survived.
Didn't you say something about her climbing up the side of the bank?
Yeah, so she couldn't even walk, but she dragged herself up the side of this bank just to flag down a car, and something like 20 cars passed.
Yeah, and the reason she couldn't walk was because her Achilles tendon had been cut.
Yeah, which
so
just
he
gives me
purposely
chills.
Was trying to make it to where she wasn't able to go anywhere. He was necessarily like kicking her out of the car and gonna let her die on the side of the road.
Yeah, she was literally left to die in a bush. She really had some fight in her, and it had to be so hard to pull yourself up that bank and see so many cars pass by and nobody's stopping, but finally somebody did. You know, she was taken to the hospital, and she lived, and she was fine, and her baby was fine too.
Dwayne Lee Little was charged and convicted with attempted homicide and got 3 consecutive life sentences, where he still resides in prison to this day.
So the Cowden family case was never officially resolved, but police are pretty sure they know who did it. But it still remains technically an unsolved case to this day.
Yeah, he was never convicted of the Cowden family murders, and he actually refused to discuss any of the murders that he was accused of. So even the ones that he went to jail for, because of the evidence and the witness that lived, the woman who he attacked, who knew his face, who had said that she had seen him at work, he still never talked about any of the murders. Some people say, well, he, didn't talk about the Cowden family murders, so maybe that means he didn't do it. But he didn't talk about any of his murders. So does that really mean he didn't do it?
Right. Even the ones he was convicted of. So, yeah, it's hard to say. But he looks pretty good for the crime. If it was someone else, there's a lot of coincidence there for Little.
Yeah, I agree. If you like what you heard today, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Make sure to keep up with our new episodes coming out.
And you can follow us on Instagram at The Abyss Pod. You can visit our website for show notes and some pictures from the stories we talk about, theabysspod.com.
And make sure to go like us on Facebook.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Our newest videos.
I've got the next one. I promise.
Richard was a log.
Richard was a log.
Brittany, please take the reins on this friggin' beginning.
Okay.
I'm done.
At the same time as this crime was... Richard's body was actually too decomposed to actually figure out an actual cause of death.
Hey, listeners! Do you like Chuck E. Cheese's? There was no gun found.
Hold on. Habanero! Boy been involved with